Jake and his friends Krui mock a disabled girl who sits quietly reading at the playground. Tanya, silently enduring their insults from her wheelchair, surprises everyone when an unexpected emergency forces her into action. Within minutes, the boys are left speechless, and soon after they are crying for forgiveness. But can they truly confront the weight of their actions, and will Tanya offer the redemption they desperately seek? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Tanya rolled her wheelchair into the neighborhood park, her heart full of hope but tempered by experience. The warm summer sun kissed her dark skin as she found her usual spot under a shady oak tree. From here she had a perfect view of the basketball court where the other kids played. With a soft sigh, Tanya pulled out her well-worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird from her backpack. The book was her constant companion, a friend that never judged or excluded her. As she opened it, the familiar scent of paper and ink wafted up, comforting her like an old friend. The sound of bouncing basketballs and excited shouts filled the air. Tanya glanced up, watching the kids run back and forth on the court. Their energy was infectious, and for a moment she felt a pang of longing in her chest. How she wished she could join them to feel the thrill of the game and the marauder of teamwork. But Tanya knew better. She had tried to approach the other kids before, only to be met with awkward silences or pitying looks. It hurt, but she refused to let it break her spirit. Instead, she channeled her feelings into her reading, losing herself in the world of Scout and Atticus Finch. As she read, Tanya occasionally glanced up at the court. She noticed how Tommy, the tallest boy, always passed the ball to his best friend Mike. She saw how Tom, the smallest boy, had the quickest reflexes and often stole the ball from the others. Tanya might not be able to play, but she was an excellent observer. The laughter and chatter of the other kids washed over her like a bittersweet melody. Tanya felt invisible, as if she were watching the world through a window, but she held her head high, reminding herself that her worth wasn't determined by whether or not she could run and jump. As the afternoon wore on, Tanya became engrossed in her book. The park around her faded away, replaced by the streets of Macomb, Alabama. She was so absorbed that she didn't notice when a stray basketball rolled towards her until it gently bumped against her wheelchair. Startled, Tanya looked up from her book. For a moment the park fell silent. All eyes were on her, waiting to see what she would do. Tanya's heart raced, but she took a deep breath and smiled. With careful movements she leaned down and picked up the ball. "Here you go," she called out, her voice clear and friendly. Despite her nerves, she held the ball out, waiting for someone to come and retrieve it. The other kids hesitated, exchanging uncertain glances. Tanya's smile never wavered, even as the seconds ticked by. She was used to this, the awkwardness that often surrounded her presence, but she refused to let it dim her inner light. As the afternoon wore on, 3 teenage boys arrived at the basketball court. Jake, Ethan, and Ryan were regulars at the park, known for their loud voices and competitive spirits. They started their game with enthusiasm, their sneakers squeaking on the concrete as they darted back and forth during a break-in. Their game. Jake's eyes landed on Tanya. He nudged Ethan with his elbow. "Hey, look who's here again, it's wheelchair girl." Ethan snickered, glancing at Tanya. "Yeah, I see her here all the time, just sitting there watching us." Ryan bounced the ball, a mischievous glint in his eye. "Maybe she's hoping to join our game one day," he joked, his voice loud enough to carry across the park. The boys laughed, their amusement fueled by boredom and a lack of empathy. They resumed their game, but now their focus was split between basketball and taunting Tanya. Jake took a shot, missing the hoop. "Oops," he called out. "Guess I need wheels to improve my game." Ethan high-fived Jake, adding, "Yeah, maybe we should all sit down to play, it might be easier." Their laughter echoed across the park. Tanya tried to focus on her book, but their words stung like tiny arrows. She blinked back, tears determined not to let them see how much their taunts hurt. Ryan, not wanting to be left out, chimed in. "Hey, wheelchair girl, want to be our referee? Oh wait, you can't stand up to make the calls." The boys howled with laughter, slapping each other on the back as if they just shared the funniest joke in the world. They continued their game, peppered with more insults and cruel imitations of Tanya. "Look at me, I'm wheelchair girl," Jake mocked, hunching over and pretending to wheel himself around the court. "I come to the park to watch real athletes play." Ethan and Ryan doubled over with laughter, completely oblivious to the pain they were causing. Tanya's hands trembled as she gripped her book tighter, trying to disappear into its pages. The boy taunts grew bolder with each passing minute. They mimicked her movement, made exaggerated sounds of squeaky wheels, and threw around hurtful nicknames. Their game of basketball had turned into a game of who could come up with the cruelest bullying before, but never this intense or prolonged. She wanted to wheel away to escape their hurtful words, but she stood her ground, refusing to let them win by chasing her away from her favorite spot in the park. Tanya tried to lose herself in the pages of her book, but the boys' cruel laughter kept pulling her attention away. She blinked rapidly, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill over. Her fingers trembled as she turned a page, the words blurring before her eyes. "Hey, wheelchair girl," Jake called out. Don't you ever get tired of just sitting there? Ethan chimed in. Yeah, don't your wheels need some exercise? Their taunts grew more frequent. Tanya's shoulders hunched as she tried to make herself smaller, wishing she could disappear. She'd always prided herself on her strength, on never letting the stares or whispers get to her. But today something was different. Maybe it was the relentless nature of their mockery, or perhaps it was the accumulated weight of years of similar experiences. A lump formed in her throat, making it hard to swallow. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, but it came out shaky and uneasy. Even the book in her hand suddenly felt heavy. Poor shield against their hurtful words. Ryan's voice cut through her thoughts. I bet she comes here every day hoping someone will push her around the park. Must be boring just sitting all the time. The boys erupted into laughter, slapping each other on the back as if they just heard the funniest joke in the world. Tanya felt her face grow hot with a mix of shame and anger. She wanted to shout back to tell them how wrong they were, but the words stuck in her throat. A single tear escaped rolling down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away, hoping no one had noticed, but the dam had broken. More tears followed, silent but steady, leaving wet trails on her face. The boys, caught up in their game of cruelty, didn't notice Tanya's distress. They continued their taunts, each one cutting deeper than the last. Tanya's usual calm demeanor cracked under the pressure. Her shoulders shook with suppressed sobs, and she clutched her book to her chest like a lifeline. For the first time in a long while, Tanya felt truly helpless. The park, once her sanctuary, now felt hostile and unwelcoming. The weight of their words pressed down on her, making her feel small and insignificant. She wanted to leave, to will herself away from their laughter and insults, but her arms felt weak and unresponsive as another wave of cruel jokes washed over her. Tanya closed her eyes, wishing she could block out the world. The boys' laughter echoed in her ears, a painful reminder of the barriers she faced every day. In this moment, her disability felt more limiting than ever before. Not because of her physical limitations, but because of the narrow-mindedness of others. As the boys continued their cruel game, oblivious to the pain they were causing, a new figure entered the scene. Lily, Jake's younger sister, skipped into the park, her pigtails bouncing with each step. She was only 7, full of energy and curiosity, always eager to explore. Jake, she called out, waving enthusiastically, but her brother, caught up in the basketball game and the cruel taunting, didn't hear her. Undeterred, Lily decided to explore on her own. She wandered towards the edge of the park, where a steep hill sloped down into a rocky ravine. The hill had always been off limits, with parents constantly warning their children to stay away, but Lily in her innocence saw it as an exciting new adventure. She inched closer to the edge, peering down with wide-eyed wonder. The rocks below glittered in the sunlight, looking like treasure to her young eyes. Lily took another step forward, teetering dangerously close to the edge. Back on the basketball court, Jake threw the ball to Ethan, laughing as they came up with more insults for Tanya. None of them noticed Lily's precarious position. Hey guys, Ryan said between breaths, where's your little sister? Jake, wasn't she supposed to come to the park today? Jake shrugged, catching the ball. Yeah, but who cares? She's probably playing on the swings or something. But Lily wasn't on the swings. She was now mere inches from the edge of the hill, balancing on her tiptoes to get a better look at the shiny rocks below. The ground beneath her feet was loose and crumbly, slowly giving way under her weight. Tanya, still sitting quietly with her book, was the first to notice Lily's dangerous situation. Her eyes widened in horror as she saw the little girl teetering on the brink of the steep incline. Oh no, Tanya gasped, her own troubles momentarily forgotten. She looked towards the boys, hoping to alert them, but they were too far away and too engrossed in their game to notice. Suddenly Lily's foot slipped on the loose gravel near the hill's edge. She let out a small gasp, her arms flailing as she teetered dangerously close to the steep drop. Ryan, who had just scored a basket, turned to celebrate with his friends when he caught sight of the little girl in peril. His eyes widened in horror, and the basketball slipped from his hands, bouncing away. Forgotten guys, Ryan shouted, his voice cracking with fear. Look, it's Lily. Jake and Ethan whipped their heads around, following Ryan's pointing finger. The color drained from Jake's face as he saw his little sister mere inches from disaster. Lily, Jake screamed, his heart pounding in his chest, but he was too far away. And Lily was already starting to fall. His feet felt like they were glued to the ground. He couldn't move, couldn't think. All he could do was watch in terror as his baby sister wobbled on the brink of the hill. The three boys stood frozen, their earlier laughter and cruel jokes forgotten. They were paralyzed with fear, unable to act or even call for help. Time seemed to slow down as they watched helplessly, their minds blank with panic. Ethan's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. He wanted to run, to help, to do something, anything, but his body refused to cooperate. All he could do was stare, his eyes wide with shock and disbelief. Jake felt like he was in a nightmare. He could see Lily's scared face, her little arms waving as she struggled to keep her balance, but no matter how much he willed himself to move, to run to her, he remained rooted to the spot. The boys watched in horrified silence as Lily teetered on the edge, gravity threatening to pull her down at any moment. They were too Shocked to act, too overwhelmed by the sudden turn of events to do anything but stand there helpless and afraid as Lily's small body began to tip backward. A sudden movement caught everyone's attention. Tan, who had been silently observing from her wheelchair, sprang into action without a moment's hesitation. Her book fell to the ground forgotten as she gripped her wheels with determined hands. With a strength born of urgency, Tanya propelled herself forward. Her arms worked tirelessly, pushing the wheels of her chair with a speed that surprised even her. The ground was uneven and each bump sent a jolt through her body, but she didn't slow down. Her eyes were fixed on Lily, her heart pounding with the urgency of the moment. "Hold on, Lily," Tanya called out, her voice steady and reassuring despite the panic she felt inside as she raced towards the edge of the hill. Tanya's mind worked quickly. She knew she had to position herself just right to prevent Lily from falling. With a final push, she maneuvered her wheelchair between Lily and the steep slope. Lily, still teetering on the brink, felt a solid presence behind her. Tanya had managed to wedge her wheelchair against a small tree, creating a barrier between the little girl and the dangerous drop. With gentle hands, T reached out and grasped Lily's arm, steadying her. "I've got you," Tanya said softly, her voice calm and soothing. "You're safe now." Lily's eyes, wide with fear, locked onto Tanya's kind face. The little girl's body trembled, but she felt secure in Tanya's grasp. Slowly, carefully, Tanya helped Lily regain her balance, guiding her away from the edge and onto safer ground. As the immediate danger passed, the boys finally broke free from their paralysis. They rushed forward, their faces a mix of relief and disbelief. Jake reached them first, scooping his little sister into his arms and holding her tight. "Lily, oh God, Lily," he murmured, his voice choked with emotion. "Are you okay?" Lily nodded against her brother's chest, still shaken but safe. Ethan and Ryan stood nearby, their earlier bravado replaced by sheepish, stark expressions. The boys turned to look at Tanya, who sat quietly in her wheelchair, catching her breath after her heroic effort. The contrast between their earlier mockery and her selfless act hung heavily in the air. They stared at her, stunned into silence by her bravery and quick thinking. Tanya met their gaze steadily, her eyes reflecting not anger or resentment but a quiet strength and compassion. In that moment, the boys saw her not as someone to be mocked, but as a hero who had saved one of their own. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as he rushed over to where Tanya and Lily were. His legs felt weak and his mind raced with a mixture of fear and relief as he approached. The reality of what had just happened hit him like a ton of bricks. "Lily, are you okay?" he asked, his voice trembling as he knelt beside his sister. Lily nodded, still clinging to Tanya's arm. Jake looked up at Tanya and a wave of shame washed over him. Just moments ago, he and his friends had been mocking this girl, laughing at her disability. Now here she was, the hero who had saved his little sister from a potentially terrible accident. The contrast between their cruel behavior and Tanya's selfless act was stark and overwhelming. Jake's mouth felt dry as he struggled to find the right words. How could he possibly thank her after what they had done? The guilt began to gnaw at him, twisting his stomach into knots. I don't know what to say, Jake finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. He looked into T's eyes, seeing kindness there instead of the anger or resentment. He felt he deserved. "You saved Lily. I can't thank you enough." Tanya offered a small gentle smile. "It's okay," she said softly. "I'm just glad your sister is safe." Jake felt tears pricking at the corners of his eyes, the shame of his earlier behavior mixed with the overwhelming gratitude he felt towards Tanya. He glanced back at his friends who stood a few feet away, their faces a mixture of awe and embarrassment. "We were so wrong," Jake said, turning back to Tanya, his voice cracked with emotion. "The things we said, the way we treated you, I'm so sorry. We were stupid and cruel, and you didn't deserve any of it." Tanya reached out and placed a comforting hand on Jake's shoulder. "We all make mistakes," she said, her voice warm and understanding. "What matters is that we learn from them." Jake nodded, wiping away a tear that had escaped. He looked at Lily, who was watching the exchange with wide, curious eyes. "Lily," he said, "Tanya here is a real hero. She saved you when we couldn't." Lily smiled up at Tanya, her earlier fear replaced by admiration. "Thank you for saving me," she said. Shyyy. Jake stood up slowly, his legs still shaky. He extended his hand to Tanya, a gesture of respect and gratitude. "Thank you," he said again, his voice steadier now. Jake stood there, his shoulders slumped and his face flushed with shame. He looked at Tanya, who sat calmly in her wheelchair, her kind eyes meeting his. The weight of his actions pressed down on him, making it hard to breathe. He began, his voice cracking. I'm so sorry. What I did, it was awful." He paused, swallowing hard. "And then you saved Lily. I can't even begin to thank you enough." Tanya listened quietly, her face showing no sign of anger or resentment. She simply nodded, accepting his words with grace. Jake felt tears welling up in his eyes. "We were so wrong. You didn't deserve any of that. I'm really truly sorry." Tanya's lips curved into a small understanding smile. "It's okay, Jake," she said softly. "Thank you for apologizing." The tension in the air was thick. Jake shifted uncomfortably, feeling the weight of his actions even more acutely in the face of Tanya's forgiveness. Behind him, Ethan and Ryan stood silently watching the scene unfold. They exchanged glances, their faces a mix of shame and discomfort. The gravity of their cruel behavior was sinking in, and they too felt the burden of their actions. Ethan took a hesitant step forward, his eyes darting between Jake and Tanya. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, unsure of what to say. Ryan, usually the loudest of the group, stood stock still, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. He stared at the ground, unable to meet Tanya's gaze. The park around them seemed eerily quiet, as if the whole world was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The basketball they had been playing with earlier lay forgotten on the court, a silent reminder of how quickly things had changed. Jake took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "I know saying sorry isn't enough," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I promise we'll do better. We'll be better." Tanya nodded again, her eyes reflecting a wisdom beyond her years. "That's all anyone can ask for," she replied gently. Ethan and Ryan exchanged nervous glances before slowly stepping forward. The weight of their actions hung heavy in the air, making each step feel like a monumental effort. They stood beside Jake, their eyes downcast and shoulders slumped. Ethan cleared his throat, his voice barely above a whisper. "Tanya, I were so sorry too." He struggled to find the right words, his face flushed with shame. "What we did was terrible. We had no right to make fun of you like that." Ryan nodded vigorously, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Yeah, we were such jerks. She didn't deserve any of that." His voice cracked as he continued, "And then you saved Lily without even thinking twice. You're amazing, and we were so wrong." Tanya looked at each of the boys in turn, her gentle gaze never wavering. She saw the genuine remorse in their eyes, the way they fidgeted uncomfortably under her gaze. For a moment silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant sounds of children playing in the park. Finally Tanya spoke, her voice soft but clear. "I appreciate your apologies. What you did hurt me, but I can see you understand that now." She paused, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "I forgive you." The boys looked up in surprise, their eyes wide with disbelief. They had expected anger, resentment, or at least some hesitation. But Tanya's forgiveness was immediate and sincere, leaving them stunned. Jake's voice trembled as he asked, "How can you forgive us so easily after everything we said and did?" Tanya's smile grew a little wider. "Holding on to anger only hurts me more. Forgiveness doesn't mean what you did was okay, but it means I'm choosing to move forward." Her words hung in the air, profound in their simplicity. The boys stood there overwhelmed by her kindness and wisdom. They had mocked her, belittled her, and yet here she was offering them forgiveness they weren't sure they deserved. Ethan's voice was thick with emotion when he spoke again. "We don't deserve your forgiveness, Tanya, but thank you. We promise we'll do better." Ryan nodded emphatically. "Yeah, we'll make it up to you somehow. We'll show you we can change." As Tanya's forgiveness sank in, the boys found themselves grappling with a new intense feeling of guilt. They had been so wrong about her, so cruel without reason, and her response only highlighted the depth of their mistake. Jake looked at his friends, then back at Tanya. "We were idiots," he said softly. "We judged you without knowing you at all. Can we start over, maybe get to know you for real this time?" As the boys stood in thoughtful silence, a woman's voice suddenly rang out across the park. "Lily, oh my goodness, Lily, Mrs. Harper." Lily's mother was rushing towards them, her face etched with worry. She had just arrived at the park and seen the group gathered near the dangerous hill. Her heart raced as she approached, eyes darting between her daughter and the others. "What happened? Is everyone okay?" Mrs. Harper asked breathlessly, pulling Lily into a tight hug. Jake, still shaken, explained in a trembling voice, "Mom, Lily almost fell down the hill, but Tanya saved her. She got to her just in time." Mrs. Harper's eyes widened as she turned to look at Tanya. Recognition dawned on her face as she realized who had saved her daughter. She had seen Tanya around the neighborhood before, always noticing the girl in the wheelchair, but never really knowing her. Tears welled up in Mrs. Harper's eyes as she knelt down beside Tanya's wheelchair. "You saved my little girl?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. Tanya nodded softly, a gentle smile on her face. "I'm just glad I was here to help," she said modestly. Mrs. Harper's composure crumbled. She reached out and grasped Tanya's hands in her own, squeezing them tightly. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Thank you so much. I can't even imagine what could have happened if you hadn't been here." The boys watched in silence as Mrs. Harper's gratitude poured out. They saw how she looked at Tanya with newfound respect and admiration, seeing beyond the wheelchair to the brave, quick-thinking girl who had saved her daughter. "You're an angel," Mrs. Harper continued, wiping away tears. "I've seen you around, but I'm sorry, I never took the time to know you. You're an incredible young woman." Tanya blushed at the praise, unused to such attention. "It's okay, Mrs. Harper. I'm just happy Lily is safe." Lily, still wrapped in her Mother's arms looked up at Tanya with wide admiring eyes. "Tanya's my hero, Mom," she said proudly. "She's so brave and strong." Mrs. Harper nodded, smiling through her tears. "Yes, she is, sweetheart, yes, she is." Mrs. Harper's eyes suddenly widened as a memory clicked into place. She gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my goodness," she whispered, staring at Tanya with a mix of awe and sadness. "You're that girl, aren't you? The one from the bus station incident last year?" Tanya's cheeks flushed and she nodded. Quietly, her eyes cast downward. The boys exchanged confused glances, unsure of what Mrs. Harper was referring to. "What happened at the bus station?" Jake asked, his curiosity piqued. Mrs. Harper turned to the boys, her eyes glistening with tears. "About a year ago there was a terrible accident at the downtown bus station. A little boy had wandered onto the road right in front of an oncoming bus." She paused, her voice thick with emotion. "A brave young girl pushed the child out of the way, saving his life, but in doing so she was struck by the bus herself." The boys' eyes widened in shock as they began to understand. They turned to look at Tanya, who sat quietly in her wheelchair, a gentle smile on her face despite the painful memory. "That girl was you, wasn't it, Tanya?" Mrs. Harper asked softly. Tanya nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, ma'am. I couldn't just stand by and watch, I had to do something." Jake, Ethan and Ryan stood in stunned silence, the weight of this revelation settling over them. They looked at Tanya with new eyes, seeing not just the girl in the wheelchair they had thoughtlessly mocked, but a true hero who had sacrificed so much for others. "You saved that child's life," Ethan said, his voice filled with awe and regret. "And it cost you so much." Tanya shrugged, her humility shining through. "I did what anyone would have done. The little boy is safe and that's what matters." The boys felt shame wash over them as they realized the depth of their misjudgment. They had cruelly mocked someone who had shown more courage and selflessness than they could have imagined. "Tanya," Ryan said, his voice cracking with emotion, "we were so wrong about you. We're more sorry than we can say." Jake nodded, tears forming in his eyes. "You're the bravest person I've ever met. And we treated you so terribly." Mrs. Harper looked between Tanya and the boys, sensing the tension and regret in the air. "What do you mean?" she asked, her brow furrowing with concern. The revelation left Jake, Ethan and Ryan speechless. They stood frozen there, eyes wide with disbelief and shame. Tanya, who had never sought recognition or praise, had acted selflessly not just once, but twice. The weight of their earlier mockery pressed down on them like a heavy blanket. Jake swallowed hard, his throat tight with emotion. He looked at Tanya, seeing her in a completely new light. The girl they had cruelly teased was a hero, someone who had risked everything to save of others without a second thought. Ethan shuffled his feet, unable to meet Tanya's eyes. He felt a deep gnawing guilt in the pit of his stomach. How could they have been so blind, so cruel? The contrast between their behavior and Tanya's selflessness was stark and humbling. Ryan, usually the most talkative of the three, found himself at a loss for words. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The shame of their actions washed over him in waves, leaving him feeling small and insignificant next to Tanya's quiet strength. Mrs. Harper looked between the boys and Tanya, sensing the tension in the air. "Boys," she prompted gently, her brow furrowed with concern. "Is everything all right?" Jake took a deep breath, gathering his courage. He knew they had to own up to their actions. "No, Mrs. Harper," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "everything's not all right. We were horrible to Tanya before all this happened." Ethan nodded, his eyes brimming with tears. "We made fun of her, Mrs. Harper. We mocked her for being in a wheelchair. We were so wrong, so stupid." Ryan finally found his voice. "We judged her based on her appearance and disability." He admitted, the words tasting bitter in his mouth. "We never bothered to know who she really was." The boy shame deepened as they spoke, the full impact of their actions hitting them hard. They had misjudged someone who had shown more courage and compassion than they could have imagined. Tanya had sacrificed her own well-being for others, while they had carelessly thrown around hurtful words for their own amusement. Tanya sat quietly in her wheelchair, her eyes soft with understanding. She had faced judgment and cruelty before, but never had she seen such a profound change in those who had mocked her. The boy's remorse was palpable, filling the air around them as the boy confessions hung in the air. Little Lily looked up at Tanya with wide awe-filled eyes. She had been listening intently, trying to understand the grown-up conversation happening around her. The young girl's heart swelled with admiration for the brave woman who had not only saved her from falling but had also risked her own life to save another child. Lily tugged gently on her mother's sleeve, her small voice filled with wonder. "Mommy, is Tanya a real-life superhero?" Mrs. Harper smiled softly, her eyes glistening with tears. "Yes, sweetie, in many ways she is." Emboldened by her mother's words, Lily took a small step towards Tanya, her tiny hands clasped together nervously, but her eyes shone with pure admiration. "Thank you for saving me, Tanya," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Tanya's heart melted at the little Girl's words, she leaned forward in her wheelchair, offering Lily a warm smile. You're very welcome, Lily. I'm just glad you're safe. Lily's next words came out in a rush filled with childlike innocence and determination. I want to be a hero just like you when I grow up, she exclaimed, her eyes sparkling. You're so brave and kind. Can you teach me how to be like that? The air around them seemed to still as everyone absorbed Lily's heartfelt declaration. Tanya felt a lump form in her throat, touched beyond words by the little girl's admiration. She had never considered herself a hero or thought that her actions could inspire others in such a profound way. Tanya reached out and gently took Lily's small hand in hers. Oh Lily, she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. Being kind and brave isn't something that needs to be taught. It's already inside you. You just have to listen to your heart and do what you believe is right, even when it's scary or difficult. Lily nodded solemnly, hanging on to every word. I promise I'll try my best to be kind and brave like you, Tanya, she said earnestly. As Tanya looked at Lily's determined little face, she felt her heart swell with an overwhelming mix of emotions. Pride, humility, and a deep sense of responsibility washed over her. She realized that her actions, born out of simple kindness and courage, had made a lasting impact, not just on Lily but on everyone present. The boys who had been watching this exchange with tear-filled eyes felt a renewed sense of shame and admiration. They saw in Lily's innocent words the purest reflection of Tanya's character, something they had failed to see earlier. The boys stood there, tears welling up in their eyes as they watched the touching scene unfold between Tanya and Lily. The weight of their earlier actions pressed heavily on their hearts, making it hard to breathe. Jake in particular felt a crushing sense of guilt and shame. He looked at Tanya, really seeing her for the first time. This wasn't just a girl in a wheelchair, this was a hero who had saved his little sister's life despite the cruel way he and his friends had treated her. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. I can't believe how wrong we were, Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. He turned to his friends Ethan and Ryan, who nodded solemnly, their faces heated with regret. Jake took a deep breath and stepped forward. His legs felt shaky, but he knew he had to do this. He knelt down next to Tanya's wheelchair, his eyes level with hers. Tanya, he began, his voice cracking with emotion, I don't even know where to start. What I did, it was so wrong. You're amazing, and we were too stupid to see it. Tanya looked at Jake, her eyes filled with understanding and forgiveness. This only made Jake feel worse. How could she be so kind after everything they'd done? We want to make it right, Ethan chimed in, his usual bravado replaced by genuine remorse. We were jerks, and you didn't deserve any of that. Ryan nodded vigorously. Yeah, we were way out of line. Is there anything we can do to make it up to you? Tanya smiled softly at the boys. You don't have to do anything, she said. Your apology means a lot to me. But Jake shook his head, determined. No, we need to do more. You saved my sister's life. You're a real hero, Tanya, and we want to learn from you to be better people. The other boys nodded in agreement. They felt a new sense of purpose, a desire to make amends and to prove that they could be better than their past actions. Maybe Jake suggested hesitantly, we could start by including you in our games. I mean, if you want to, of course. We could figure out ways to play that work for everyone. Tanya's eyes widened in surprise. She had never expected this kind of response. That would be nice, she said, a hint of excitement in her voice as the boys began to discuss ideas for inclusive games. Mrs. Harper watched with a proud smile. She saw the transformation happening before her eyes, these young men taking responsibility for their actions and striving to be better. The park, which had earlier been a place of cruelty and isolation for Tanya, was now filled with the promise of friendship and understanding. The boys' hearts were heavy with the weight of their past actions, but they were also lighter with the hope of redemption and the opportunity to learn from Tanya's incredible example. Later that evening, Jake, Ethan, and Ryan gathered in Jake's bedroom. The atmosphere was heavy with guilt and regret as they sat in silence, each boy lost in his own thoughts about the day's events. Jake broke the silence first. Guys, I can't stop thinking about Tanya, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. We were so wrong about her. Ethan nodded, his usual cocky demeanor replaced by genuine remorse. I know, man, I feel terrible. She saved your sister's life and we treated her like she was nothing. Ryan, who had been fidgeting with the basketball in his hands, set it down gently. We need to do something, he said firmly, to show Tanya we're sorry and that we appreciate her. The boys fell silent again, each racking their brains for ideas. Jake's eyes wandered to a photo of Lily on his desk and his heart clenched as he remembered how close he had come to losing her. It's not just about saying sorry, Jake said slowly, we need to show that we've learned something, that we understand how wrong we were. Ethan leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. You're right, but what can we do? It feels like nothing we could do would be enough. Ryan's eyes lit up suddenly. What if we organize something at school, like a presentation or an assembly about not judging people? Jake nodded enthusiastically. That's a great idea. We could talk about what happened and how Tanya showed us what real courage looks like. As they discussed there, and the boys felt a mix Of emotions there was still shame for their past actions but also a growing sense of purpose and determination to make things right. You know, Ethan said quietly, I never really thought about how hard it must be for someone in a wheelchair. All the things we take for granted. Jake nodded, his eyes filling with tears, and despite everything T was so quick to forgive us she didn't have to do that. That's what real strength is, Ryan added, not how fast you can run or how many baskets you can score but how you treat others, especially when they'd been unkind to you. The boys fell silent again, each contemplating the powerful lesson they had learned about empathy and kindness. They realized that their actions had consequences and that judging someone based on appearances could mean missing out on knowing an incredible person. We've got a lot to make up for, Jake said finally. But I think this is a good start. We'll show Tanya and everyone else that we've changed. Ethan and Ryan nodded in agreement as they continued to plan their school presentation. They felt a newfound sense of responsibility. They knew that honoring Tanya wasn't just about one grand gesture, but about changing their behavior every day to be more understanding and inclusive. The next day Jake, Ethan and Ryan met at the park early in the morning. They sat on a bench, their eyes scanning the playground equipment and basket court where they had spent countless hours playing. You know, Jake said thoughtfully, I never realized how much of this park Tanya can't use. Ethan nodded, his brow furrowed. Yeah, it's not fair. She should be able to enjoy the park just like everyone else. Ryan's face lit up with an idea. Guys, what if we did something about that? What if we made the park more accessible for kids like Tanya? Jake and Ethan turned to him intrigued. What do you mean? Jake asked. Well, Ryan continued, his excitement growing, we could organize a fundraiser to renovate the park, add some equipment that's accessible for kids with disabilities. Ethan's eyes widened. That's brilliant. We could do it in Tanya's honor. It would show her how sorry we are and how much we've learned. Jake nodded enthusiastically. And it would help other kids like her too. We could make a real difference. The boys huddled closer, their voices animated as they began to plan. They discussed different fundraising ideas, a bake sale, a car wash, even a community basketball tournament. We could ask local businesses to sponsor us, Ethan suggested. My dad knows a lot of people in town. I bet he could help. Jake chimed in. And we could make flyers explaining why we're doing this, tell people about Tanya and how she inspired us. As they talked, their excitement grew. They realized that this project could be more than just an apology. It could be a way to change their community for the better. We should talk to the park committee, Ryan said. Find out what kind of equipment would be best and how much it might cost. Jake nodded. And we should definitely talk to T, ask her what she thinks would be most helpful. We don't want to assume we know what's best. The boys felt a sense of purpose they had never experienced before. They were no longer just thinking about themselves, but about how they could make life better for others. You know, Ethan said softly, I never thought I'd say this, but I'm kind of glad all this happened. I mean, not the part where we were jerks, but it's opened my eyes. You know, Jake and Ryan nodded in agreement. They understood exactly what Ethan meant there. Encounter with Tanya had changed them in ways they were only beginning to understand. As the sun rose higher in the sky, the boys stood up ready to start working on their plan. They had a lot to do, but they were determined to make it happen. This fundraiser would be their way of showing gratitude to Tanya and making a real difference in their community. The boys threw themselves into organizing the fundraiser with newfound enthusiasm. They spent their afternoons brainstorming ideas, making phone calls, and creating colorful flyers to spread the word about their cause. Jake approached his parents first, explaining their plan and Tanya's inspiring story. His mother's eyes welled up with tears as she listened. Oh honey, she said, pulling Jake into a hug, I'm so proud of you for wanting to make things right. Encouraged by his parents' support, Jake reached out to Lily's teacher, Mrs. Martin. She was touched by the boys' initiative and offered to help spread the word among the school community. Meanwhile, Ethan approached local businesses with Ryan by his side. They visited the hardware store, the bakery, and even the town's small movie theater. At each stop they shared Tanya's story and explained their vision for an accessible park. You should have seen their faces, Ethan told Jake later, when we told them about Tanya saving Lily and how she got hurt saving another kid before. People really want to help. The community's response was overwhelming. The hardware store offered to donate materials for the park renovation. The bakery promised to provide treats for the fundraiser. Even the movie theater agreed to host a special screening with ticket proceeds going to the cause. As word spread, more and more people wanted to get involved. Mrs. Harper, grateful for Tanya's bravery, rallied her book club to organize a bake sale. The local fire department volunteered to run a car wash. Ryan's idea for a community basketball tournament gained traction too. The high school agreed to lend their gym for the event, and Local sports teams eagerly signed up to participate. Throughout it all, the boys made sure to keep Tanya at the center of their efforts. They visited her at home, sharing their plans and asking for her input on the park renovations. Tanya was overwhelmed by their efforts. "You don't have to do all this," she said softly, her eyes shining with emotion. "But we want to," Jake replied earnestly. "You showed us what real bravery and kindness look like. We want to make sure everyone knows your story." As the day of the fundraiser approached, the whole neighborhood buzzed with excitement. Posters featuring Tanya's story adorned shop windows. People stopped the boys on the street to offer help or simply to express their admiration for the project. The boys worked tirelessly, coordinating volunteers, setting up booths, and making sure everything was perfect. They were exhausted but filled with a sense of purpose they had never experienced before. On the eve of the fundraiser, as they sat on Jake's porch reviewing their plans one last time, Ethan looked at his friends with a smile. "You know," he said, "I never thought we could do something this big. But look at us now." Jake nodded, feeling a warmth in his chest. "Yeah," he agreed, "and it's all because of Tanya. She didn't just save Lily that day, she saved us too in a way," Ryan grinned, adding, "She showed us how to be better, and now we get to share that with everyone else." As the sun set, casting a warm glow over the neighborhood, the boys felt ready for the big day ahead. They had no idea how successful the fundraiser would be, but they knew that no matter what, they had already achieved something remarkable. They had brought their community together, all in the name of kindness and inclusion. On the day of the fundraiser, the sun shone brightly over the neighborhood park. The once quiet space buzzed with activity as people from all corners of the community gathered, their faces alight with excitement and purpose. Colorful banners fluttered in the gentle breeze, proclaiming a park for all in bold letters. Jake, Ethan, and Ryan arrived early, their hearts pounding with nervous energy. They moved from booth to booth, making sure everything was perfect. The smell of freshly baked goods wafted from the bake sale table, while cheerful music played from speakers near the basketball court. As the crowd grew, the boys exchanged glances, their eyes shining with pride and anticipation. They had worked so hard for this moment, and now it was finally here. "Look at all these people," Ethan whispered in awe. "I can't believe how many showed up." Jake nodded, a lump forming in his throat. "It's amazing. I just hope Tanya likes it." At precisely noon, a familiar figure appeared at the park entrance. Tanya wheeled herself forward, her eyes wide with surprise as she took in the scene before her. She had known the boys were planning something, but this was beyond anything she had imagined. The crowd parted as Tanya made her way through, smiles and warm greetings following her path. She noticed familiar faces from around the neighborhood, people she had only ever seen in passing, now beaming at her with admiration and respect. Jake, Ethan, and Ryan hurried to meet her, their faces flushed with excitement and nerves. "Tanya," Jake called out, his voice trembling slightly, "welcome to the fundraiser. We hope you like it." Tanya looked around, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Like it," she said softly. I don't know what to say. This is incredible." As they guided her through the park, explaining the different activities and introducing her to volunteers, Tanya felt a warmth spreading through her chest. She saw the basketball tournament in full swing, heard the laughter from the face painting booth, and smelled the enticing aroma from the barbecue grill. But what touched her most were the stories she overheard. People were talking about her not with pity or discomfort, but with genuine admiration. They spoke of her bravery, her kindness, her strength. "Did you hear about how she saved that little girl? I can't believe she's so young and already such a hero. It just goes to show you can't judge a book by its cover." Tanya felt her cheeks grow warm, overwhelmed by the outpouring of support and recognition. She had never sought an attention for her actions, had never expected to be celebrated like this. Yet here she was, surrounded by a community that had come together because of her. As they reached the center of the park, where a large banner hung detailing plans for the accessible equipment, Tanya finally let her tears fall. She looked up at the boys who were watching her anxiously. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. I never expected anything like this. You've done something truly amazing here." The boys smiled back at her, their own eyes misty. In that moment they realized that their efforts had not only transformed the park and united the community, they had also changed themselves in ways they were only beginning to understand. As the fundraiser reached its peak, Jake, Ethan, and Ryan gathered near the center of the park. Their faces were a mix of excitement and nervousness as they prepared for the moment they had been planning for weeks. The crowd around them hushed, sensing something important was about to happen. Jake cleared his throat and spoke into a microphone, his voice shaky but determined. "Can we have everyone's attention, please? We'd like to ask Tanya to come up here." Tanya, surprised by the sudden spotlight, wheeled herself forward. The crowd parted to make way for her, smiling encouragingly as she passed. As Tanya reached the boys, Ethan stepped forward, holding something behind his back. "Tanya," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "we wanted to do something special to honor you and everything you've done for our community." Ryan continued, You've taught us so much about courage, kindness, and what it really means to be strong. Jake then revealed a beautiful wooden plaque from behind Ethan's back. The polished surface gleamed in the sunlight as he held it up for everyone to see. We had this made for you, he said, his eyes meeting Tanya's. Tanya's eyes widened as she read the words engraved on the plaque. True strength is not in what you can do, but in how you lift others. The boys presented the plaque to Tanya, who accepted it with trembling hands. Tears welled up in her eyes as she traced the words with her fingers, hardly believing what she was seeing. We were so wrong about you, Jake said, his voice cracking, and we're so sorry for how we treated you. You've shown us what real strength looks like. Ethan nodded, adding, you saved Lily without a second thought, even after how awful we were to you. That's true courage. Ryan stepped forward, his eyes shining. We hope this plaque will always remind you of how amazing you are and how much you've changed our lives. Tanya looked up at the boys, her vision blurred by tears. She was overwhelmed by the gesture and the sincere emotion in their voices. The transformation she saw in them was remarkable. These were not the same boys who had mocked her just a short time ago. I don't know what to say, Tanya whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Thank you, this means more to me than you could ever know. The crowd around them burst into applause, many wiping away tears of their own. As Tanya held the plaque close to her heart, she realized that this moment represented more than just a personal triumph. It was a testament to the power of forgiveness, empathy, and the capacity for change that exists in everyone. As the applause died down, a small figure pushed through the crowd. It was Lily, Jake's little sister, clutching something tightly to her chest. Her eyes were wide with admiration as she approached Tanya. Tanya, Lily said softly, her voice barely audible above the murmur of the crowd. I made something for you. Tanya turned her wheelchair to face Lily, a warm smile spreading across her face. You did? That's so sweet of you. Lily, with a shy smile. Lily held out a piece of paper. It was a drawing clearly made with all the love and care a child could muster. Tanya took it gently, her eyes widening as she looked at the colorful crayon masterpiece. The drawing showed two figures holding hands. One was in a wheelchair, unmistakably Tanya, with a big smile on her face. The other was smaller, with pigtails, clearly meant to be Lily. Above them, in wobbly letters surrounded by hearts and stars, were the words, my hero. Tanya's eyes filled with fresh tears as she looked at the drawing. The simple, heartfelt gesture touched her deeply. She looked up at Lily, who was watching her anxiously, waiting for her reaction. Oh, Lily, Tanya breathed, her voice thick with emotion. This is beautiful. Thank you so much. Lily's face lit up with joy. Do you really like it? She asked eagerly. I love it, Tanya assured her. It's the most wonderful gift I've ever received. Without hesitation, Tanya opened her arms wide. Lily didn't need any further invitation. She rushed forward, throwing her arms around Tanya in a tight hug. Tanya hugged her back just as fiercely, holding the little girl close as they embraced. Both Tanya and Lily were overwhelmed by the bond they had formed. Tanya, who had often felt isolated because of her disability, now felt a connection that went beyond any physical limitations, and Lily, who had found a real-life hero, felt safe and inspired in Tanya's arms. The crowd around them watched the touching scene, many wiping away tears. Jake, standing nearby, felt a lump in his throat as he watched his little sister and Tanya. He realized that Tanya hadn't just saved Lily's life, she had become a role model, a friend, and a hero to his sister. As the fundraiser continued in full swing, Jake, Ethan, and Ryan found themselves standing together near the edge of the park. They watched as Tanya, still holding Lily's drawing, chatted with other community members who had come to support the cause. Jake let out a deep sigh. Guys, can you believe how much has changed in just a few days? Ethan nodded, his eyes fixed on Tanya. I know, it's like we were living in a different world before. Ryan chimed in, his voice soft and thoughtful. We were so wrong about her, about everything, really. The boys fell silent for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. The weight of their past actions hung heavy on their shoulders. But there was something else there too, a sense of growth, of change. Jake broke the silence. You know, I never thought I'd say this, but I'm kind of glad all this happened. Ethan and Ryan looked at him surprised. What do you mean? Ethan asked. Jake gestured towards the bustling fundraiser. Look at all this. Look at what we've learned. We were such jerks before, but now. He trailed off, struggling to find the right words. Now we know better. Ryan finished for him. We understand that everyone has value, no matter what they look like or what challenges they face. Ethan nodded in agreement. It's like Tanya Plaque says, true strength is in how we lift others up. We didn't get that before, but now we do, Jake said firmly, and we can't forget it. We can't go back to how we were. The three boys looked at each other, a new determination in their eyes. They had started this journey as bullies, but somewhere along the way they had become something else, advocates, allies, friends. So what do we do now? Ryan asked. Jake thought for a moment. We keep going. We stand up for people who are different. We spread kindness wherever we can. Ethan nodded enthusiastically. Yeah. And we don't just stop with this fundraiser. We keep looking for ways to make our community better for everyone, and we never ever judge someone based On how they look or what they can or can't do, Ryan added. The boys fell silent again, but this time it was a comfortable silence. They watched as Tanya wheeled herself through the crowd, her face beaming with joy. They saw how people responded to her, not with pity or discomfort but with genuine respect and admiration. "We've got a lot to learn from her," Jake said softly. Ethan and Ryan nodded in agreement as they stood there watching the fundraiser they had organized. They felt a sense of pride, not in themselves, but in the change they were helping to create. They had taken the first steps on a new path, one that led towards compassion, understanding and kindness. As the sun began to set, casting a warm golden glow over the park, the community gathered around a makeshift stage. Jake, Ethan and Ryan stood nervously at the microphone, ready to announce the results of the fundraiser. The crowd buzzed with excitement and Tanya sat in the front row, her eyes shining with anticipation. Jake cleared his throat and spoke into the microphone. "Everyone, we want to thank you all for coming out today and supporting this amazing cause." His voice trembled slightly but he pushed on. "We're incredibly proud to announce that we've raised $50,000 for the park renovation." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Tanya's hands flew to her mouth in shock, tears welling up in her eyes. Mrs. Harper, standing nearby, gave her a warm squeeze on the shoulder. Ethan stepped forward next. "This money will go towards installing accessible playground equipment, smooth pathways for wheelchairs and sensory play areas for kids with different needs added. We want to make sure that every child in our community has a place where they can play and feel included." As the boys stepped down from the stage, the mayor of their small town took their place. "I'm proud to say that the city will be matching these funds," she announced, causing another wave of cheers to ripple through the crowd. "Construction will begin next month and we hope to have the new inclusive park ready by summer." Tanya wheeled herself towards the boys, her face beaming with joy. "I can't believe you did all this," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you so much. This means more than you know." Jake knelt down beside her wheelchair. "Tanya, we're the ones who should be thanking you. You taught us so much about kindness, bravery, and not judging others. This park, it's just the beginning of how we want to make things right." Lily, who had been standing nearby with her mother, rushed over to Tanya. "Does this mean we can play together at the park now?" she asked excitedly. Tanya nodded, wiping a tear from her cheek. "Yes, Lily, it means all of us can play together." As the crowd began to disperse, families lingered to chat about the exciting changes coming to their community. Parents discussed how the new park would benefit not just kids with disabilities but all children, teaching them about inclusivity from a young age. Tanya sat quietly for a moment, taking it all and she thought about all the kids like her who would finally have a place where they could play without feeling different or left out. The joy she felt was overwhelming, knowing that her experience had sparked such a positive change in her community. As the weeks passed, the community eagerly watched the park's transformation. Finally, on a bright Saturday morning, the newly renovated park was ready to open. A colorful banner stretched across the entrance reading, "Welcome to our inclusive park." Tanya arrived early, her heart fluttering with excitement. She couldn't believe how different everything looked. Smooth, wide pathways wound through the park, perfect for her wheelchair. There were swings with special seats, merry-go-rounds flush with the ground, and raised sandboxes that she could easily reach. As she admired the changes, she heard familiar voices calling her name. Jake, Ethan, and Ryan jogged up to her, their faces beaming with pride and excitement. "Tanya, what do you think?" Jake asked, gesturing to the park around them. Tanya's eyes sparkled. "It's amazing," she said softly. "I never thought I'd see something like this in our town." Ethan stepped behind her wheelchair. "Well, how about we give you the grand tour?" he suggested with a grin. Tanya nodded eagerly, and soon they were off. The boys took turns pushing her wheelchair along the smooth paths, pointing out all the new features. They showed her the sensory garden with its variety of textures and scents, the musical play area with instruments at different heights, and the quiet zone for kids who needed a break from all the excitement. As they moved through the park, their laughter echoed in the morning air. Ryan recounted funny stories from the fundraiser, like when the mayor had accidentally sat on a freshly painted bench. Tanya shared her own tales, telling them about her first attempts at wheelchair basketball and how she'd accidentally rolled into the pool during a family barbecue. The boys listened intently, seeing Tanya in a whole new light. They realized she wasn't just brave and kind, she was funny, smart, and had a wicked sense of humor. As they pushed her around, they found themselves opening up to her, sharing their own hopes and fears. Jake confessed his dream of becoming a doctor, inspired by Tanya's story. Ethan talked about his struggles with dyslexia and how he'd always felt different too. Ryan shared his passion for art and how he hoped to use it to make the world a little brighter. Tanya listened to each of them, offering words of encouragement and support. She felt a warmth in her heart, realizing that these boys who had once mocked her were now becoming true friends. As they approached the new accessible treehouse, Ethan said, "You know, Tanya, we can't thank you enough for Teaching us to see beyond appearances. You're one of the most extraordinary people we've ever met. Tanya blushed, touched by his words. And you guys have shown me that people can change, she replied. I'm really glad we're friends now. The four of them spent the rest of the morning exploring every inch of the new park, their laughter and chatter filling the air. It was clear to anyone watching that a beautiful friendship had blossomed, one that went far beyond the surface and celebrated the extraordinary person Tanya truly was. As the sun began to set, casting a warm golden glow over the park, Tanya, Jake, Ethan, and Ryan found themselves at the heart of the playground. They were surrounded by the joyous sounds of children laughing and playing on the new accessible equipment. Tanya's eyes sparkled with delight as she watched a young girl in a wheelchair easily glide onto the merry-go-round. Jake noticed her expression and felt a lump form in his throat. You know, he said softly, I never thought I'd see so many kids playing together like this. It's beautiful. Tanya nodded, her smile radiant. It really is. And to think it all started with you guys. Ethan shook his head, his voice thick with emotion. No, Tanya, it started with you, your kindness, your forgiveness. It changed us. Ryan, usually the jokester of the group, wiped a tear from his eye. Yeah, you taught us what real strength looks like. It's not about physical ability, it's about the size of your heart. The four friends fell silent for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. The weight of their journey from cruel mockery to genuine friendship hung in the air between them. Suddenly Lily came bounding up to them, her pigtails bouncing. Tanya, come play with me on the swings, she exclaimed, grabbing Tanya's hand. Tanya laughed, her eyes crinkling with joy. Of course, sweetie boys, care to join us? Jake, Ethan, and Ryan exchanged glances, then broke into wide grins. Race you there, Jake shouted as they all took off towards the swings. For the next hour the park echoed with their laughter. They took turns pushing each other on the swings, Tanya included. They spun on the merry-go-round until they were dizzy and even attempted to build the world's tallest sand castle in the raised sandbox. As the sky turned a deep purple, signaling the end of their day, the friends gathered their things to leave. They stood at the park entrance, reluctant to part ways. You know, Tanya said, her voice soft but strong, I never thought I'd say this, but I'm glad for that day you guys teased me. The boys looked at her shocked. What? Why? Ethan asked. Tanya's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Because it led to this, to us becoming friends, to this amazing park, to all these kids having a place where they belong. Sometimes the hardest moments in our lives can lead to the most beautiful changes. Jake knelt down beside Tanya's wheelchair, his own eyes misting over. Tanya, you've taught us so much about kindness, about forgiveness, about seeing people for who they really are. Ryan nodded, and a tickly yeah. You've shown us that empathy isn't just a word, it's a way of life. Ethan added, his voice choked with emotion, and that true strength isn't about physical ability, but about the capacity to love and forgive. As they said their goodbyes, each of them knew that they were leaving the park changed. They had learned the most valuable lesson of all, that kindness, empathy, and forgiveness could truly change lives, and in doing so, they had not only transformed a park, they had transformed themselves. If you enjoyed the story of Tanya, Lily, and Jake and his friends, I handpicked this next story that will touch your heart. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.